Later, they want to rewrite history. It's cold. But that's the move. They're painting Diddy as a target, not a predator. They're saying, of course he had women. Of course he had parties. He's Diddy. He's been rich and famous for 30 years. But everything was consensual. If anyone had a problem, why didn't they report it back then? And here's the fourth part of their playbook: use his legacy as armor. They're not just defending Sean Combs. They're defending the legend of Diddy. The businessman. The icon. The guy who launched Biggie, changed fashion, survived hip-hop beefs, made vodka pop, and gave back to the culture. His team wants the jury to see a man with enemies, a man who's been envied, studied, and shadowed his whole life. They'll say he's black, he's powerful. And in America, when you reach that level, they'll find a way to tear you down. Now, don't get it twisted. His lawyers know they can't just shout racism and walk away with a win, but they will use that layer, especially if the jury includes people who've seen how the system treats black men in high-profile trials. And that brings us to their fifth move: destroy the case before it hits the heart. What does that mean? They're trying to get key evidence thrown out. Word is they're already filing motions to exclude certain footage, throw out testimony from anonymous accusers, and block old civil case details from bleeding into the trial. They'll argue that most of the accusations are hearsay, old, or prejudicial. They're also attacking the feds directly, saying the whole investigation is based on confirmation bias, where agents started with a conclusion and then worked backward, cherry-picking evidence to support it. If the judge agrees on any of that, huge blow to the prosecution. But the boldest move? Diddy might take the stand. That's right. Word is his team is considering putting him on the witness stand. Now that's a risky strategy. Most defense teams avoid it. One wrong answer, one emotional slip, and it can blow everything up. But if Diddy does it and comes off calm, composed, and remorse-free, that might be the moment the jury starts second-guessing everything. Of course, this all depends on how things go in the coming weeks. Because there's one more thing: his lawyers are watching like hawks. The witnesses. If any of the prosecution's witnesses start contradicting themselves on the stand, getting shaky under cross-examination, or revealing prior settlements or financial motives, the defense will pounce. They'll make this look less like a criminal trial and more like a payday scheme. And remember, you don't need the jury to believe he's innocent. You just need them to not be sure he's guilty. That's how the game works. Reasonable doubt. That's the whole strategy. And don't forget the media machine. Diddy's team is also working outside the courtroom: subtle PR moves, quiet celebrity endorsements, old friends saying things like, "I never saw that side of him." All of it is part of a long game to sway public perception. Because if the court of public opinion tilts even a little, that might reach a juror. That might change the whole vibe. It's all about control. Control the narrative, control the perception, control the damage. So while the prosecution is trying to burn it all down with shocking accusations, Diddy's team is playing chess, piece by piece, witness by witness. They're working to dismantle the story, flip the focus, and walk their client out that courtroom without cuffs. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one man's guilt or innocence. It's about power, leverage, legacy, and silence. And if Diddy's defense plays it right, he might just walk away untouched, even if the truth got buried in the process. So now we get to the part that could make or break this entire trial: the testimonies. Because at the end of the day, the courtroom ain't just about evidence, it's about who's willing to talk and what they're about to say. And in this case, the list of names reportedly stepping forward is enough to make the entire music industry squirm. Some people stayed silent for years. Others already settled out of court. But now, with the feds involved and immunity deals on the table, folks are finally talking, and what they're saying could bury Diddy. Let's start with the biggest question: who's taking the stand? Word on the street is at least 4 women will testify directly against Diddy, each one claiming they were groomed, manipulated, abused, or silenced under his empire. And what makes these stories hit hard? They're similar, too similar, same patterns, same setups, same people involved. These aren't just random names. One of them, allegedly a former backup dancer who worked on several bad boy tours in the early 2000s. She claims she was 19 when she was brought into Diddy's inner circle. She thought it was a career move. Instead, she says she was flown out, isolated in hotels, given gifts, and eventually coerced into doing things she never consented to. She says she signed an NDA after a scare. Now, she's breaking it with federal protection behind her. Another woman set to testify was allegedly an aspiring singer who met Diddy through a producer friend. She thought she was getting a studio session. What she got, she claims, was a weekend at one of Diddy's houses where she says the party never stopped, the cameras were always rolling, and people were told to just go with it. She says she was drugged. She says she woke up in a robe she didn't recognize. She says she was threatened when she tried to leave. These stories, the prosecution's calling them pattern evidence to show that Diddy didn't just make mistakes, he ran a system, a playbook, one that used power, access, and fear. But it's not just the women talking. At least two former employees are testifying. One was part of Diddy's personal security detail. The other, an assistant who worked in and out of his LA and Miami homes. The bodyguard reportedly told investigators he transported young women, some of whom looked barely legal, to and from private properties. He claims he was told never to ask questions, just make sure phones were taken, and that no one left until the boss said so. That same bodyguard is expected to testify that he once saw a hard drive full of recorded footage from house parties. Bedroom footage. He says it was kept in a private safe room. Diddy called the vault. The assistant? She's going to testify about the money. She claims she saw large cash transfers, envelopes given to lawyers, NDAs printed at M, and even girls flown out under fake names. She also reportedly witnessed one alleged victim break down after a private meeting and says when she tried to console her, she was told to mind her job or lose it. But here's where it gets even messier. One of Diddy's former industry collaborators, a name not confirmed yet, but believed to be a known figure, is rumored to testify under subpoena. They're not a victim. They're a witness to the machine. They're expected to say they saw things at parties that they should have spoken up about. That there were drugs. That there were girls who looked scared. That Diddy's team ran everything like a business. They say they didn't speak before, out of fear. But now, they're ready to go on record, and get this, there's talk of a tech expert being brought in, not a victim, not an insider, but someone from Diddy's past digital team. This person reportedly recovered deleted footage from one of Diddy's servers. They're expected to testify that there were files with labels, dates, and faces, some encrypted, some not. They say the footage wasn't just surveillance, it was control, and maybe the wildest name being floated? Cassie.no confirmation yet. But insiders say prosecutors are negotiating, and if Cassie testifies, it's over because her civil case already outlined years of abuse, coercion, and manipulation. If she repeats even part of that on the stand, under oath, in front of a jury, it could destroy everything Diddy's team is trying to protect. But with all this comes the risk. The defense? They're gonna go scorched earth on these witnesses. They'll bring up old tweets, question motives, ask about money, ask about timing, try to frame them as bitter EXEs, failed artists, clout chasers, or just people looking for a check now that Diddy's vulnerable. And that's why credibility matters, because the jury isn't just listening, they're watching. They're watching who breaks down, who stays calm, who flinches under pressure, who seems real, and who feels rehearsed. And let's not forget the cross-examination is brutal. One wrong word, one contradiction, and the whole testimony can get thrown into question. But these witnesses? They're still showing up, even knowing they'll be dragged online, even knowing the machine behind Diddy still has money, still has influence, still has reach. They're showing up because for some it's not just about justice, it's about finally being heard. And in a case like this, their words might be the only real evidence that ever sees the light. So who's taking the stand? People who were there, people who were silent, people who helped, and people who were hurt. And what they say could determine if this trial ends in conviction, or if Diddy walks out untouched, because once those doors close, and those voices speak, the courtroom will never be the same. Alright, y'all, we've come to the final round. The evidence has been presented. Witnesses have come and gone. Allegations, heavy ones, have rocked the courtroom. But now, it's down to the last words, closing arguments. This is where both sides pull every thread together and beg that jury to either convict or let Diddy walk. And the question hanging over everything is simple: is this the end for Diddy? Let's start with the prosecution. Their closing was sharp, calculated, cold. They walked the jury step by step through every witness, every allegation, every timeline. They called Diddy a predator who used power and silence as his weapons. They didn't hold back. They laid out a pattern, not a one-time incident, not a misunderstanding, but a system, a design. A long-running playbook where young women were targeted, isolated, and abused. They reminded the jury of the dancer who said she was flown out and drugged, the assistant who said she printed NDAs under pressure, the bodyguard who said he saw the footage in the vault, the tech expert who unlocked files the world was never supposed to see. They told the jury, this isn't about fame. This isn't about cancel culture. This is about accountability. For someone who thought he was untouchable, they played clips, read messages, even referenced Cassie's lawsuit, not the payout, but the pattern, and then they dropped the line that hit like a hammer. You don't get to build an empire on broken people and expect to walk away clean. Now let's talk Diddy's team. His lawyers stood up, sharp suits, calm voices, but their tone was defensive, emotional. They didn't just defend the man, they defended the legacy. They painted Diddy as a victim of timing, a successful black man being hunted by opportunists, former employees with grudges, and women rewriting history for a payday. They told the jury, these aren't criminal claims, they're civil complaints dressed up in federal clothing. They reminded the court that some of these witnesses were paid, that some signed NDAs and never said a word until now. They pointed at inconsistencies in timelines, gaps in stories, accusers who said one thing years ago and another today, and they hammered the point home, you're being asked to convict a man based on emotion, not evidence. Then they pivoted hard to race and reputation. They said Diddy's being treated like he's guilty because he's rich, powerful, and black. They said the government's case was fueled by media hysteria, not facts, that the jury had a duty to rise above the headlines and focus on the law, and they ended with a gut punch. If you strip away the fame, if you strip away the rumors, all that's left is doubt, and doubt means not guilty. Now let's keep it real. This jury is under insane pressure. They know what this verdict means, not just for Diddy, but for hip-hop, for the music industry, for every victim who's still scared to speak. Some jurors reportedly asked for extra security before deliberations. Why? Because whether they convict or acquit somebody's going to be mad. And let's not forget the courtroom isn't the only battlefield. Outside, the media's spinning, fans are divided, celebrities are going ghost, sponsors are pulling deals, and Revolt TV? Quiet. Diddy's empire has already taken hits, his reputation shaken, but the verdict? That's the final blow. That's the moment that decides if this man is a legend or a warning. So, what's really at stake? If convicted, Diddy could be looking at decades in federal prison, money laundering, sex trafficking, conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, drug charges. It adds up. And the feds don't file unless they're ready to bury you. He could lose everything. His freedom, his companies, his entire catalog, and worst of all, his legacy, because once a guilty verdict drops, he's not Diddy anymore. He's an example. But if he walks, if that jury finds doubt, you're going to see two things happen immediately. One, his legal team hits every talk show. He'll try to rebuild the brand, drop a documentary, call it survival, redemption, a false attack. And two, the industry starts whispering louder, because even if he walks free, the damage is done. Other cases might pop up, more women might come forward, more stories will surface, and Diddy, he might be legally free, but the court of public opinion, that might never forgive him. So is this the end for Diddy? Truth is either way, something ends here. If he's convicted, the myth of untouchable moguls takes a hit, a new standard gets set in music, in power, in silence. If he walks, then the system still favors the powerful, still lets money talk louder than pain, and survivors will think twice before stepping up again. The jury has the final word, but history? That's being written right now. In that courtroom. In those closing arguments. In every heart that's watching this case and asking what happens when the man behind the empire is finally forced to face the music. We're about to find out, and now, it all comes down to this: 12 people, one decision, 30 years of power, fame, and untouchable status on the line. After weeks of emotional testimony, graphic accusations, power plays, and silence-shattering revelations, the jury finally has the case. The world's asking one question: will Diddy walk free? The jury's job isn't easy. Behind those closed doors, they've got to go through every charge, every testimony, every scrap of evidence, and they've got two options: guilty or not guilty. There's no in between, no probably, no sort of, just yes or no, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Let's be real. Diddy's lawyers fought hard to cast doubt on every allegation. They said the stories didn't match. They said the timing was shady. They called the whole thing a witch hunt, but the prosecution, they hit back with a pattern. They said this wasn't about one accuser, this was about a system, a machine built to trap, isolate, and silence. Now the jury's got to decide who they believe. Do they believe the women who said they were groomed and abused? Do they believe the ex-employees who said they saw the tapes, the money, the threats? Do they believe the government who say they've got the files, the texts, the proof? Or do they believe Diddy's team, that this is all a money grab, that it's jealousy, revenge, hype, that this man who gave the world Biggie, who ran empires, who stood at the top for decades is being taken down just because he made it? As deliberations drag on, tension is sky high, reporters are camped outside, fans are split down the middle, some praying he walks, some demanding he burns, and inside that courtroom, dead silence, because the jury knows they're not just deciding Diddy's fate, they're deciding what the system does with power. They're deciding if fame is still a shield, or finally a target. Hours turn to days. The courtroom's on edge. Whispers spread. Is there a hung jury? Is someone holding out? Are they close? And then it happens. The word comes down. The jury has reached a verdict. Everyone files in. Cameras are banned, but phones are buzzing. Diddy sits still, dark suit, unreadable face. His lawyers on both sides, locked in. The judge calls for quiet. A piece of paper is handed over. It's time. The 4% stands on the charge of sexual trafficking, on the charge of conspiracy, on the charge of unlawful surveillance, on the charge of drug distribution, on the charge of money laundering. What's the answer? That's what the world's waiting to hear, because let's be honest either way. This moment changes everything. If Diddy walks free, he'll walk out the front doors with a smirk. And no cuffs, no cell. His lawyers will celebrate. His fans will cheer, and the headlines will explode with Diddy found not guilty. But the silence after, that's different, because the people who testified, they'll still live with what they said. The public, split forever. Some will say he beat the system. Others will say the system protected him. Justice, in their eyes, denied. And Diddy, even if he walks, his empire's scarred. The brands, shaken. The legacy, changed forever. Every handshake, every deal, every interview tainted. Because even not guilty doesn't always mean innocent in the court of public opinion. But what if the verdict is guilty? Then the courtroom erupts, gasps, cries, reporters sprinting outside, and Diddy, face drops. Suddenly, the mogul becomes a convict. His lawyers go into emergency mode, appeals, sentencing pleas, bail motions, but it's already over. That jury just made history, because this ain't shoplifting, these are federal charges, and if guilty, he's facing 30 years minimum, could be more. Everything he built, bad boy, revolt, Sean John starts to crumble. The money gets frozen. The catalog, maybe sold. The vote or die shirts, buried. The hip-hop kingpin, erased. And more victims, they might come forward, because now the floodgates are open. People who were scared, now they've got a reason to speak. So, what does the jury's verdict really mean? It's not just about Diddy, it's about what happens when the powerful get cornered. It's about whether the justice system still plays by fame's rules, or whether the tide has finally turned. If guilty, it's a reckoning, a message to every celebrity who thought they were above consequences. If not guilty, it's a warning that no matter how loud the victims scream, the machine still protects its own. Right now, the jury holds everything, and when that verdict hits, no matter what it says, something dies. Maybe it's a legacy, maybe it's a lie, maybe it's the illusion that power protects forever, because either way, the world won't see Diddy the same again.